People ask me, how do I stay motivated every day? I tell them the fact that you're asking that question shows you're not serious, because no one who is truly serious waits around for a fleeting feeling to start something important. If it matters enough, you don't consult your emotions. You take action. And if you're still procrastinating, making excuses, waiting for a spark, perhaps you're only temporarily attracted to the idea, not truly ready to commit to the process. Motivation is not a traitor, but it's not loyal either. It comes and goes with your emotions, and if you depend on it, you'll live a life dictated by something you don't control. You don't need more motivation. You need a clear reason to stop postponing. A serious person doesn't need to feel excited. They need to be aware of the consequences of not starting. Commitment doesn't come from elevated emotions. It comes from clarity, a sober awareness of where you are and where you'll fall if you keep repeating the same cycle. Serious people don't fantasize about the destination. They dissect what's holding them back, and then they tackle it piece by piece, without waiting for inspiration, without waiting for ideal conditions. You're not lacking dreams, you're lacking decisions. Everyone has dreams, but very few dare to turn them into non-negotiable schedules. The difference isn't in how much you want something, but in what you're willing to give up every day to turn desire into reality. Every day you don't act, you're not standing still, you're falling behind, because time doesn't wait. Others are moving forward, and you're still waiting for the right moment. But the perfect moment will never come. Serious people don't wait for the circumstances. They choose a point to begin and start despite the imperfections. You don't need a detailed plan. You need that first action step, the one you can't talk yourself out of. When you wait for the right feeling to begin, you're teaching your brain that action only follows comfort. That's the opposite of every success principle that's ever worked. People who build careers, bodies, and lives don't rely on how they feel. They rely on discipline, habits, and repeatable systems. If you need motivation to do what you already promised yourself you'd do, you're turning that promise into a conditional suggestion. Maturity begins when you stop treating yourself like a child who needs to be coaxed into action. Maturity is knowing that you no longer have the luxury of staying still, even when no one is urging you, cheering you on, or waiting for you. If you still need an emotional push, look at where you're standing. Ask yourself, how many times have I promised to change? And after all those times, what has really changed? If the answer is not much, you don't need another piece of advice. You need an awakening. People believe that if they want something badly enough, they'll do it. But they forget that between wanting and doing lies a vast space. And that space can only be filled with unconditional action. Don't measure your commitment by your initial excitement. Measure it by how you act when the excitement is gone. Serious people don't need an energetic morning to get started. They only need to remember one thing. They said they would, and they don't make a habit of breaking promises to themselves. Not everyone needs to be forced to work. There are people who, just by remembering the times they gave up, find enough reason to rise again. There are people who, simply by realizing that today is part of the past they'll live with in the future, and that they will be the ones to bear the weight of in action, find enough reason to begin. That is true seriousness, quiet, rational, unromantic, just a silent loyalty to what is right and necessary. If you're still searching for motivation, stop. Replace it with a more important question. Am I willing to live another year like the one I just had? If the answer is no, then you don't need inspiration. You need to reject the old loop. Every time you wait for another day to start, you drift further from the best version of yourself. You're turning action into a luxury. Serious people don't promise they'll always feel ready. They only promise that they won't give up on their worst days. They build systems so they don't have to be in the mood. They remove negotiation from essential habits, and they repeat the right behaviors so often that those behaviors become part of who they are. If you still need a sign to begin, here it is. No one but you can change the direction of your life. No mentor can help you if you still treat motivation as a condition for action. No words can save you if you don't stop procrastinating. You want results, you must commit. Not commit when it feels right, but commit even when you're tired, bored, or doubtful. Results don't come from feelings, they come from schedules. Success doesn't arise from excitement, it comes from a behavioral system designed not to collapse when your mood shifts. If you still need emotion to start, you haven't built a system, and if you don't have a system, you don't have control over your life. It's no coincidence that the most successful people also live by the most stable routines. They don't ask themselves, am I motivated today? They just do what needs to be done and let the results speak. And in the end, only one truth remains. Today, did you live like someone serious, or are you still waiting for something outside your control to change your life? Anyone can stay committed when the mood is high, energy is abundant, and life is flowing smoothly. But what happens when you've had a sleepless night, when your heart feels heavy, when everything around you seems to be pushing against you? That is when the system is truly tested. And most people don't fail because they don't know what to do. They fail because they build systems for good days only, never preparing for the dark ones, the days when all motivation evaporates and the instinct to give up rises to the surface. You know that feeling well, waking up and not wanting to get out of bed, the to-do list towering like a mountain, your mind begging to shut everything down. This is where the system either proves its strength or collapses on the spot. And if your system isn't built to function under such conditions, then it's not a system, it's just a collection of wishes wrapped in a schedule. A habit only matters if it continues regardless of how you feel. The power of a system doesn't lie in its complexity, it lies in its non-negotiability. It's something you do because you've decided it's part of your life, not because it feels right in the moment. Repeating action, independent of emotion, is the core of inner strength. It's not glamorous, it doesn't give instant excitement, but it is the only thing that carries you through the moments when most people stop. Persistence doesn't come from willpower alone. Willpower is finite. Inspiration is fleeting. But a system, if designed wisely, can carry you through even the days when you no longer believe in yourself. Because a system doesn't ask you to convince yourself. It doesn't require thinking. It only requires you to follow through on what you've committed to, like brushing your teeth or buckling your seatbelt. Natural and repeatable. If you've ever said, I'm serious about this, then answer this question. Do you still take action when you no longer want to? Because that's the moment that separates the one who merely wants something from the one who has become it. A person with a solid system doesn't need to rethink things every day. They don't wait for their mood to improve. Everything has already been determined in advance. What to do, when to do it, and how. When the mind is tired, the system takes over and leads. Remember, you don't fall to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your habits. On difficult days, goals won't save you, only habits, automated through systems, keep you from falling into free fall. Successful people don't outpace you because they're always full of motivation. They outpace you because they've removed the option of choice from their core actions. They don't ask, should I do this? They just do it. It's part of who they are. True stability is forged not in the bright light of energetic mornings, but in the dark hours when you have nothing left except one decision: continue or quit. And every time you choose to continue, you etch a new layer into your subconscious identity. Not as the procrastinator, not as the one who needs encouragement, but as the one who does what's right, even when feeling terrible. Emotions are unpredictable variables, but a system is a solvable equation. A strong system doesn't require you to be superhuman every day. It only asks you to perform the smallest version of the predetermined action. Not 2 hours in the gym, just 15 minutes of movement. Not 50 pages, just 2 before bed. Not finishing a chapter, just sitting down to write a single paragraph. These small actions, repeated in moments of weakness, make the biggest difference. because not everyone who starts finishes, but those who keep going, even without motivation, don't need luck. Their system is the insurance policy for their future. You don't need to be great in every moment. You just need to act without skipping the hard ones. Consistency in times of stagnation is more valuable than brilliance in fleeting moments, because the world doesn't reward the best starter. It rewards the one who refuses to turn a backward step into a backward path. Want to build a life that doesn't collapse every time your emotions dip? Don't ask, how do I get motivated again? Ask instead, does my system still function on the days I want nothing at all? And if the answer is no, you need to rebuild it. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be complicated. It just needs to be solid enough that it won't break when your mind drifts. Those without systems will always be led by emotions, and emotions don't care about your goals. They'll make you dream today, then doubt yourself tomorrow. But the system, if built right, won't ask how you feel today. It'll simply say, it's time to act. And sometimes that's all it takes to save a day from falling apart. Don't design a plan for your best days. Build one for the days you want to quit. Because if your system can't survive those, it won't take you anywhere worth going. Most people don't fail because they lack ability, but because the systems they've built only function on sunny days. They write out plans, draft schedules, sketch goals on paper, and feel a surge of excitement as they imagine their ideal selves. But they forget one thing. Life does not promise you an abundance of ideal days. There will be sluggish mornings, chaotic afternoons, evenings paralyzed by fatigue or confusion, and if the system you've set up can't function in those moments, it's no better than a castle built on sand. Don't make plans when your mind is soaring. Make them when you can clearly envision the worst version of yourself, the one who wakes up late, gets lazy, makes excuses, procrastinates, and wants to give up. Because that person, not the enthusiastic one you often picture, is the one who will show up most often on hard days. And that version needs to be managed by a system that's strong enough to hold. A good plan isn't one that excites you when you read it. It's one that still works when you feel absolutely nothing like doing it. You don't need a perfect process for when everything goes right. Good days don't need systems. You'll get most things done just by riding the wave of inspiration and energy. But when the bad days come, when you're exhausted, irritated, full of self-doubt, being criticized, or simply overwhelmed, that's when the system proves its value. Not by producing high performance, but by simply continuing. A small action completed in the middle of chaos is the most important victory you can claim. Sustainability doesn't lie in the perfect plan you can only follow for 3 days. It lies in the minimalist system you can maintain for 300. What you repeat becomes who you are. If you only take action on good days, you're not consistent, you're just inspired. But if you still act on days when you're lost, then you're no longer ruled by emotion, you've become someone who leads. That is the dividing line between those who truly transform and those who always say they'll start next week. A good system always includes a fallback. It doesn't require you to be excellent every day. It only asks that you perform a minimum viable version that keeps the habit alive. Instead of forcing yourself to read 30 pages, commit to reading just 2, enough to keep the chain unbroken. Instead of aiming for an hour-long workout, set a threshold of 10 minutes of movement. Because what matters isn't intensity, it's continuity. A habit that survives, even in its smallest form, is more powerful than one that flares up then vanishes. You don't need to prepare for the days when you get things right. You need to prepare for the days when you don't. Your system shouldn't collapse after one poor decision. It needs to be flexible enough to absorb a misstep and clear enough to guide you back on track without requiring you to start over. When you build a life that tolerates errors, you stop being haunted by perfection. Instead, you learn to maintain a pace not too fast to burn out, not too slow to drift off course. True progress doesn't come from being strong on a single day. It comes from not falling apart over a string of weak ones. Because if one bad day leads to 2 days of surrender, then 3 days of confusion, the system has failed. But if one day of exhaustion still results in you completing even 5% of your target, then you've protected your inner rhythm. And that is long-term strength. It's not the fastest runner who wins, it's the one who doesn't stop. A person who designs their life wisely doesn't ask, what should I do on a good day, but rather, what will I do on the worst one? If you wake up late, your mind is foggy, your body sluggish, your spirit drained, can you still do anything at all? And if the answer is no, then the problem isn't you, it's how you've designed your behavior. A good system doesn't demand your best self. It only asks you to show up on time doing the action, even if it's the smallest fraction of it. Life never promises that today will be easy, but you can promise that today, no matter what, you will act. And to do that, you can't rely on emotions. You need structure. You need a small but solid framework, a sequence of no-brainer actions strong enough to keep you on the rails. That's not discipline. That's a strategy to protect yourself from the betrayal of momentary emotion. Don't evaluate your system on a good day. Evaluate it on the bad ones. When you have a headache, no sleep, chaos in your mind, and no one waiting on you to do anything. If you still do what needs to be done, even in its smallest version, then you've won over yourself. No one has to know. No one has to acknowledge it. But you'll know that once again, you didn't betray your promise to yourself. And at that point, you don't need motivation. You have trust. A promise without a system will sooner or later turn into a gentle form of self-deception. A soothing lie you tell yourself to feel better. You're not trying to be dishonest, but when you repeatedly promise to change, to begin, to stay consistent, without building a concrete, repeatable mechanism to support those promises, you're not making a commitment. You're planting yet another seed of disappointment in your subconscious. You write your goals on paper, feel determined, feel clear. But just a few days later, the grind of work, shifting emotions, and the familiar laziness pull you off course again. You tell yourself maybe tomorrow, but tomorrow never comes. You convince yourself that you're not ready today, but the truth is you never built a foundation sturdy enough to hold you up. This isn't weakness. It's the absence of a system. And without a system, every promise drifts away like smoke. No one keeps their word to themselves by memory. You keep it through structure, by removing negotiation from your core behaviors. A serious person doesn't ask, do I have enough energy today? They simply follow the predetermined schedule as a habit, without needing praise, without needing motivation. And if you often find yourself in the pattern of forgetting to start, forgetting to continue, or forgetting what matters, the issue isn't lack of discipline. It's that you're living without a system to protect your own word. Every time you say, I'll do it, but don't set a specific time, action, or location, you're programming yourself to get used to breaking promises without consequences. The problem isn't one broken promise. It's that you slowly stop believing in yourself. Each time you go back on your word, you erode your self-confidence slowly but surely. And when you no longer trust what you say, you won't have the internal power to pursue anything truly meaningful. The system is how you turn intention into an unavoidable event. It turns, I'll work out, into, at 6 a.m. every day, I walk for 15 minutes. No negotiations. It turns, I want to read more, into, before bed, I read at least 2 pages. No feelings involved, just action. And when the system is firmly built, you no longer live in the tug-of-war between what you should do and what you feel like doing. You act because you're programmed to act, like brushing your teeth, like drinking water, not because you're inspired, but because not doing it feels off. Those without a system often tie success to motivation, but motivation is unreliable. It arrives like a spark and disappears without warning. If you rely on motivation to do the important things, you'll find yourself trapped in a tiring cycle. Start, stop, self-blame, promises, start again. That cycle doesn't need more discipline. It needs a system to cut it off. Something that doesn't ask how you feel. It just requires you to do what you said you would. Unsystematic action is easily manipulated because you can always find an excuse, always push it to tomorrow, always tell yourself it's not the right time. But a system doesn't let you hold emotional negotiations with yourself for too long. It shows up like a steel frame that keeps your behavior from being bent by feelings. You do the right thing, not because you feel like it, but because you've already decided. And the system simply repeats that decision. True freedom doesn't mean doing whatever you feel like. True freedom is not being pulled away from your core by momentary impulses. The system is the foundation for that freedom. When you know exactly what you'll do every morning, you aren't hijacked by distractions. When you have a fixed hour to shut off devices and read, you're not swept away by noise. When you've locked in your daily non-negotiables, you don't need to resist temptation. You simply don't give it a chance to enter. Every promise must be protected by specific, repeated action. Every good intention needs a system behind it if you want to turn it into a result. No one builds a healthy body just by writing "lose weight" on a board. No one becomes financially disciplined just by wishing to save more. What separates dreams from reality is the schedule, the principles, the automation. If you don't yet have a system, look back at all the promises you've broken to yourself. Ask, when was the last time I fulfilled exactly what I committed to? And if you can't remember, then the first step is not another promise, it's rebuilding your foundation. Any behavior not tied to a specific schedule, not repeated at a minimum daily level, not backed by a clear process, will eventually be replaced by a form of procrastination disguised as emotion. You don't need grand commitments, you need precision. You don't need more promises, you need a system to keep the ones you already made. And once the system is repeated long enough, you no longer need willpower, because when an action becomes the default, you don't have to fight with it anymore. That's how successful people build identity. They don't just do the right thing. They become the kind of person who can't not do the right thing. And that begins with one simple decision. Never let any behavior exist outside the system. Complex systems often die young, not because they're ineffective, but because they can't withstand the chaos of everyday life. A system that's too intricate, too ambitious, too rigid may sound impressive, but it breaks easily the moment you miss a beat, skip a day, or simply feel tired. In contrast, a simple system, when repeated long enough, quietly builds a level of stability so strong that you no longer have to think, choose, or convince yourself. That's the difference between the person who produces results and the one who chases inspiration. The former doesn't try to do too much. They do less, but they do it forever. We often underestimate the power of simplicity because it doesn't look impressive. A small daily action doesn't give you bragging rights. It doesn't feel glamorous, doesn't earn applause. Yet those very small actions, when repeated without interruption, are what create irreversible change. Simplicity doesn't mean easy, it means clarity. And clarity is hard to break because it leaves no room for negotiation. Look back at the commitments you've failed to keep. Most didn't collapse because you lacked willpower, but because your system demanded too much at a time when you had too little. You wanted to work out for an hour a day, but life got in the way, and one busy day made you skip. You aimed to read 30 pages each night, but one night of fatigue made you close the book. After missing once, you felt you had failed. Because you failed, you felt discouraged. Because you were discouraged, you gave up. A chain reaction that could have been avoided if you had just simplified your demand to the point where refusal was impossible. The simpler an action is, the fewer chances it has to be broken. No one is too tired to drink a glass of water. No one is too busy to take 3 deep breaths. No one is too distracted to jot down a single thought at the end of the day. These small, seemingly trivial acts form the bedrock of sustainable systems. And when minimalist habits are embedded deeply enough, you'll be surprised to find that you no longer need to try as hard because everything has become reflective. Don't confuse simplicity with weakness. People say, what can 5 minutes a day really do? But they forget that the people doing 5 minutes a day are often the only ones still going after 3 months. Meanwhile, those who demand an hour a day, most of them quit by the second week. What creates results is not how much you do in one session, it's how many sessions you can go through without breaking. Keeping a habit alive matters more than executing it perfectly. If you have to choose between doing 100% for 1 week and stopping, or doing 30% for 52 weeks, a wise person will always choose the latter. Because consistency doesn't create drama, but it creates accumulation. And accumulation is the one thing you can't fake. A healthy body, a strong mind, a solid skill, all are products of repetition. Not bursts, not climactic days, but the quiet ones, where you keep going after everyone else has dropped off. The more complex your system, the easier it is to find reasons to postpone. The more steps you have, the more excuses you will invent not to start. The more decisions required, the quicker you will experience decision fatigue. And when your mind is tired, you don't act. Not because you don't know what to do, but because everything feels too heavy to begin. But if all you need is one simple step each day, then every day becomes an opportunity. You don't need to be strong enough to conquer everything. You just need to be clear enough not to get lost. Those who build effective systems don't ask, how much can I do? They ask, what can I sustain, even on my worst day? And the answer always lies in simplicity. One affirmation written each morning, one single action after your coffee, 10 minutes of device-free time. When a behavior becomes part of your reflex chain, it is no longer subject to fleeting emotion. Simplicity is the foundation of long-term strength. It is the shield that protects you from burnout. It is the anchor you return to after losing direction. It's what keeps you from needing to find motivation again, because you never lost connection with the core behavior. And when you keep the behavior, you keep the identity. You're no longer someone who used to start. You become someone who never stops. Want to build a life that doesn't fall apart? Don't begin by asking, how much can I do? Start with this question. What's the simplest thing I can repeat every day? And once you find the answer, don't underestimate it, because that small thing might just become the hinge that holds you steady over the long run. The simpler it is, the harder it is to break. And what's hardest to break is what lasts. If every day you have to ask yourself, do I feel motivated enough to start, then you're living inside a risky mechanism, one where every action must pass through the emotional approval gate. An emotion, as you know, is fragile, fickle, and easily manipulated by any trigger. A wave of tiredness, a phone call, a piece of news, or even just a few minutes of grogginess after waking up. People who build sustainable achievement don't let feelings dictate behavior. They live by rhythm, a rhythm pre-designed, repeated consistently, regardless of whether it's Monday or Sunday, whether their mood is high or low, whether their mind is clear or clouded. Emotion is a wave, rhythm is a heartbeat. Waves rise and fall, but it's the steady heartbeat that keeps you alive. And so it is with life. You can't rely on fleeting highs to get important things done, because there will be days when you feel nothing, no excitement, no drive, no fire. But if you have rhythm, you still do it, because rhythm doesn't require you to feel. It only requires you to stay in step. Look at those who maintain long-term stability. They wake up at the same time, tackle important work within fixed time blocks, preserve small rituals to open and close the day. These aren't restrictive habits, they're protection mechanisms. Because when your mind starts trying to negotiate with itself, rhythm has already reserved a space for action. There's no internal debate, no emotional discussion. You simply do what has already been decided. Rhythm brings liberation. It frees you from the fatigue of constant decision-making. It frees you from the temptation to delay. And most importantly, it frees you from the internal conflict, the place where you know what's right, but don't do it simply because you don't feel like it. Rhythm eliminates the deadly gap between knowing and doing. And that's what separates people who produce results from those who endlessly talk about them. You don't need a complicated rhythm, you just need consistency. A fixed window of time for reading, a repeated action anchored to a familiar hour, a non-negotiable moment of silence at the start of the day. These small anchor points, when placed correctly, guide your entire daily system into a deliberate flow. And once that flow is established, you don't need to perform well every day. You only need to continue. If you constantly feel the need to motivate yourself, perhaps it's because you're living without rhythm. Your body doesn't know when to work or when to rest. Your mind drifts between the undone past and the unstarted future. And that's why you feel exhausted. Not because you're doing too much, but because you're living without grounding. Rhythm is that grounding. It shapes your day, it creates a sense of control. And the feeling of control is the most sustainable form of energy you can generate on your own. A person who lives by rhythm is not rigid. They are free, because it's those without structure who are yanked around by emotion like puppets. They don't know when to start, when to stop. They respond to the urgency of others or the distractions within themselves. But people with rhythm don't need to rush. Everything already has its place and time. Clarity conserves their energy. Consistency protects them from hovering in the gray zone between intending to do and maybe not doing at all. Start small. Choose one single rhythm to lock into your day. A consistent wake-up time, a 30-minute window without devices, one specific action after lunch. When you protect that first rhythm, you'll have enough foundation to build on, not all at once, but brick by brick. And every brick laid correctly makes you stronger, clearer, more decisive. You stop chasing your day. You begin to lead it. Emotion makes you sprint for a moment, but rhythm gives you endurance for a lifetime. Don't ask, how do I feel today? Ask instead, what rhythm is waiting to be repeated today? And if you can answer that, you have the key. Because a person with rhythm doesn't need emotion to act, and one who acts without needing emotion cannot be controlled by circumstance. Growth in personal development doesn't come from explosive days. It comes from the days you keep rhythm, when there's no reason left to do so, except the quiet promise you made to yourself. And when you live by steady rhythm, no emotion, whether exhilarating or crushing, can pull you off track for long, because you always have something to return to. A moment, an action, a ritual, not needing excitement, only requiring the right rhythm. People often admire those with iron discipline and assume it's some kind of extraordinary mental strength. But most people misunderstand the nature of discipline. Discipline doesn't come from making the right decision every day. It comes from having stopped making decisions. Because every important action has already been coded into habit. No more choices, no more negotiations, only repetition. And that is the highest form of personal freedom. You are no longer pulled around by emotion, mood, or circumstance. A truly disciplined person doesn't wake up each morning thinking, should I work out today or do I want to read today? They don't ask anymore, because the answer has already been decided. Everything that needs to be done has been built into the structure of their day, firmly, consistently, and without requiring positive feelings to execute, because they understand that every time you have to choose, you open the door to procrastination, and every accepted delay becomes a valid option for the next time. True freedom doesn't come from doing whatever you want whenever you want. True freedom comes from being able to control yourself so thoroughly that the right actions still happen, even when you don't feel like it. That's not coercion. That's the pinnacle of intentional living. And to reach that point, you don't need extraordinary willpower. You just need to systematize your important behaviors until they no longer require conscious thought. Inspiration is fuel, but fuel needs refilling. Habit, when deeply ingrained, runs on its own. You don't need inspiration to brush your teeth each morning. You don't need inspiration to turn off the lights at night, because those actions are now part of your identity. So why do you think you need inspiration to read 2 pages, or write 1 journal entry, or exercise for 10 minutes? It's simply because you haven't turned those things into non-decision behaviors. But once something becomes default, you act without being pulled into a mental tug-of-war. It's time to pause and admit something. You cannot rely on emotion to sustain long-term commitment, because emotion is a variable. But discipline requires a constant. Discipline doesn't ask whether you're tired today, or busy, or in the mood. Discipline only asks one thing: are you continuing? And the only correct answer is yes, because the right action has already been programmed. It's no longer a decision. The truth is, you don't need more motivation, you need fewer decisions. Every decision is an internal conversation, and the more conversations you have, the more likely you are to lose to yourself. Highly disciplined people are those who know how to eliminate unnecessary conversations. They don't put themselves in situations where they have to decide over and over again. They design their days around principles, not emotions. And that's what allows them to conserve energy for the things that actually matter. Look at your life. How many times have you known what you should do but delayed it just because your mood wasn't right? How many times have you sat in front of an important task only to let yourself be pulled into something easier? How many times have you started strong only to end with guilt? The problem isn't a lack of willpower. The problem is that you've allowed important actions to remain optional instead of automatic. You don't have to be strong every day. You just need strong habits to act for you. This doesn't mean you become rigid or robotic. It means you become smarter. You understand that transformation doesn't come from dramatic days. It comes from the ability to repeat the right action even on the worst days. And that only happens when you've programmed deeply enough for action to happen without thought. Habit without decision is the highest form of consistency. It takes you further than good intentions. It keeps you on track even when you lose your way. And more importantly, it builds a quiet kind of trust. Trust in yourself. Because every day you repeat the right behavior, you're not just completing a task, you're reinforcing your identity. Not as a dreamer, but as a doer. Not as someone who feels, but as someone who creates. Want to live with discipline? Start by turning one small behavior into something that no longer requires thought. A fixed hour for writing, a default morning routine, a non-negotiable end-of-day wind down. The fewer decisions you have to make, the more aligned your life becomes. And the more aligned your life becomes, the less likely you are to fall into emotional traps. You don't need to discipline your entire life overnight. You only need to do one thing. Choose one behavior you want to maintain and remove the option to skip it. Let it happen like brushing your teeth, like stepping into the shower, like putting on a shirt before you leave the house. No hesitation, no debate, just repetition. And that repetition, without inspiration, without decision, is what builds the foundation for every form of lasting success. What kills your effort isn't difficulty, nor is it failure. What kills effort is boredom. You don't give up because you can't continue. You give up because your mind no longer finds it novel. Your emotions stop being fueled by excitement, and you begin to question whether this steady action still holds any value. But the truth is, the very thing that feels mundane today is what quietly lays the foundation for a version of you that is resilient and unshakable tomorrow. People who fail are those who abandon repeated actions simply because they're no longer exciting. People who succeed are those who continue those actions even when they no longer feel anything from them. If you want to go far, you must learn to love consistency, even when it's not glamorous. Because lasting achievement doesn't come from fleeting creativity, but from how many days in a row you can repeat something simple without letting yourself drift off course. We live in a world addicted to emotional highs. Everything must be new, everything must be fast, everything must deliver immediate effect. But success doesn't play by those rules. Success is the result of hundreds, thousands of seemingly trivial actions performed consistently, precisely, and without interruption. You don't need to create explosions. You need to maintain rhythm in silence. You don't need inspiration to brush your teeth in the morning because that action is already tied to your identity. So why do you need inspiration to read 2 pages, exercise for 10 minutes, write 3 lines in a journal or plan your day? It's only because you haven't programmed them long enough. And because you haven't, those actions remain optional